Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Peter Dobie. I'm from Silicon Valley in California. I'm American. And I will say I was trained as a Lacanian psychoanalyst of Jacques Lacan. So if I speak another language, I apologize. But I've tried to keep it, I've tried to stay away from the Lacanese. So it's a bit of an introduction to, the paper is a bit of an introduction to a concept in Lacanian psychoanalysis, ordinary psychosis, by way of the theme. Okay, so it is called Psychoanalytic Life Coaching in Times of Ordinary Psychosis, or Why Don't I Want to Be a Therapist? This curious question puzzled me for a while, until I realized the obvious. I'm not a therapist. And I'm not sure I want to obey the golden rule of being a therapist. That is to not reveal the details of one's life. Because precisely we live in an era where identity is paramount. In fairness, I was trained as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist in Europe, but I'm not licensed as one in the United States. And so I currently call myself a psychoanalytic life coach. But how has this affected the orientation of my practice? This intriguing prompt led me to organize my findings, and it turns out life coaching is not merely the butt of a joke of therapists, after all, and there are a lot of jokes we can make about therapists. It has oriented my work in a crucial way towards today's symptoms and became a happy accident for finding out more about them. Why do I insist on the coaching element if, at the end of the day, I'm a psychoanalyst? What would be the purpose of a non-coaching life coach? Someone who precisely doesn't give what is asked for. I believe the answer is identity. People come wanting a role, a place in society. Who am I becomes who shall I be, and what should I do? This has revealed much that may have not come about in a therapeutic setting, where one is expected to bring forth their emotions, inner life, and not their practical wishes and wants. As well as the protocol of a therapist supposing to hide the details of their life. For example, on Instagram and Facebook, which is quite silly because they're today's main forms of transference. My orientation has to do with the nature of society, knowledge, and symptomology today, what I will call our borderline era, where typical therapeutic-oriented vantage points and classical psychodynamic modalities stop short. I suspect, due to an epoch where definitions in general are collapsing, the classical distinctions between neurosis and psychosis are also breaking down. So that the borderline between neurosis and psychosis. It seems more and more that patients present themselves as being characterized as borderline, having occasional breaks from, and I must specify something like borderline-esque, having occasional breaks from the social bond that, if they didn't hold it together in general, might have us characterize them as being psychotic. These patients usually come in after coming to a difficulty being part of the social bond, not finding a way to fit in trouble with interpersonal relationships, which solve too frequently on a bipolar roller coaster not unlike our time, which might be characterized as being both hyper-connected and excruciatingly alienating simultaneously. A reading of their non-contextualized speech points towards the need of a treatment that calls not for interpretation, but a bridging of the gap between an excessive and near psychotic delusionary existence and an exasperatedly uniform but nonconformist neurosis through the utilization of contextualization, which I want to emphasize here as a technique, contextualization. It is well known that the borderline subject is triggered. And let me state that I find these individuals to be triggered when the semblance of their identity or identities comes into question. And surely enough, books and films today come with trigger warnings. If the role that has been carved out in the social bond and outside of it is disrupted, one's unique and ordinary psychosis is triggered. These breaks are one reason in our age people don't need frequent sessions as much and come mainly for check-ins. And I might add, with our schizo-internet culture of today, one wonders how could one not have a personality disorder? Though what I would say is that we have precisely an age of disorder of identification. Here I ask us to broaden our conception of psychosis to facilitate a better understanding of how the contemporary subject operates and how repression, if it occurs at all, or if it occurs in a different way, which is often unclear, given absences of contextualization and the outsourcing of memory to the repository or unconscious of our iPhone, and how it's signified today. Ordinary psychosis. Ordinary psychosis is a term introduced into the Lacanian psychoanalytic community some 20 years ago by Jacques-Alain Miller, concerning cases that did not fit into either diagnostic category of neurosis or psychosis. In the Lacanian community, this has answered that question posed by your colleague. You know, when you see them at the water cooler and they say, I've had this patient for years and years and I can't decide if they're neurotic or psychotic. It tried to answer that. These individuals go in and out of many psychotic-esque delusions, a state essentially of being in flux, but also of what we might call psychosis-like. The developmental origin of ordinary psychosis is formulated through this, for the psychoanalysts in the room, is formulated through the Lacanian construal of the Oedipus complex, where in short, the paternal metaphor or name of the father represents castration. You know, in neurosis you find that, the name of the father is produced, and in psychosis you find the absence of that paternal function, the name of the father. And then in ordinary psychosis is a compensatory middle ground, which I believe is synonymous, can be synonymous with identity, and nonetheless with a possible borderline spectrum or combination of neurosis and psychosis. So then, ordinary psychotic solutions. My suggestion is that a conversational and identificatory direction of work, the aim of which lies in the subject finding their solution in a unique identity, is a stabilization process, and a sense of meaning occurs, as is seen when such an individual finds a special pride in a job, for instance, or a carving out niche on Instagram, or even a pathologized one, such as seen in the popularity of announcing oneself as being bipolar, Asperger's, etc. Nowhere can this be seen more fervently as in the outpouring happening in identity politics. The splintering into groups and communities, what in the autism spectrum literature is becoming known as neurodiversity, which recognizes particular minorities of neurological difference. Such identification populations seem to stabilize one and keep them from their mini psychotic breaks, acting as a suture point that plugs up or stands in for psychosis. Miller maintains that you have a compensatory stand-in make-believe that's not actually registering to make one neurotic as a true name of the father, but as a constructed solution. I just brought up these little pictures to say, if you have neurosis, you have the castration, right? Normal castration, you have the name of the father, as the Lacanians put it. In psychosis, you don't have that. And in ordinary psychosis, you have a compensatory middle ground. So this comes from Lacan's later work, in particular the idea of the synthome, the synthetic man, created by the subject through analysis in order to stabilize them, and if you will, to make them, themselves, in a creative way, to make the psychotic a nearly neurotic individual. Is this creation of the self not what we find as the known issue of identity and borderline personality disorder? Its fundamentally disorganized sense of self yearning for one to be created? For such ordinary psychotics, one is kept together by identity as symptom, I claim, that which differentiates them and allows to identify themselves so as not to be triggered, which is why kids today want to advocate for safe spaces to avoid triggering. But this always fails, and it's especially ironic since these safe spaces are essentially places to play out their psychosis. Okay, ordinary psychosis and the borderline spectrum, comparing it to borderline. Further comparing ordinary psychosis to BPD, we find commonalities and analogs in, for example, weak ego functioning, histrionic temperaments, poor ability to make therapeutic alliances, impulsivity, acting out, and profound difficulties breaking into the social bond. You guys all know this. And an almost complete avoidance of intimacy in relationships. And incidentally, I do believe technology plays a not insignificant role in this autistic era, or to again invoke Miller, an idiotic and solitary jouissance. All of which contribute to rendering classical psychoanalytic interventions more or less useless, as the patient simply doesn't know what to do with them, without a background of a life story to analyze themselves against. One way of filling in the blanks is to facilitate a conversation that is of their making, rather than the silence of the impartial classical analyst, but one that is not instructive, like a coach, but guided by their own speech, i.e. helping along the identification process through, for example, the use of synonymous stories. So it's like a secondary contextual example that play out in literature, art, the news, and playfully appropriate them and assimilate them into the construction of the patient's hitherto absent story. And that's to back up the significance of their claims being attempted in the uncoordinated, uncontextualized speech of the sessions. So I'm going to use a case vignette actually from which is being video recorded. I'm glad that I chose a Facebook interpretation of a friend's anger at the recent allegations of sexual assault against USA Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And I apologize, it's a bit American-centric and probably no one knows what's going on, but it's a case where a judge is being tried for sexual assault. And she writes, "I think I understand now why I am so upset about this case. I tried to sleep last night, and all I kept thinking is, why are they trying to, with this candidate, to ram him through, despite the majority of the country and the majority of women saying no, and please stop, and wait." And in that very question, I found the answer. It was so simple and so alarming. They are literally playing out on the national stage and in real time what it feels like to be overpowered. And so I wanted to point out how this is an example where something that's not contextualized, like a subject, like a patient's life story, that Oedipal myth they're missing, can be contextualized through something else. Here we find analogies in well-known practitioners, such as Fonagy and his mentalization, essentially thinking about thinking, and what Kohut describes for dealing with personality disorders as a clinic of affirmation, invoking such prompts as, "How could it be any other way?" Or, to use my own example, "The love you are giving is the love you know." Kohut additionally calls for mirror transference, which seeks to expand upon psychic experience. An analog is found in the presentation life coaches frequently perform, showing their life on social media that potential patients might see themselves in. The inverse of the hidden therapist. In this vein, we can see anew the transference-focused treatment of Kernberg, which for many reasons would be seemingly helpful in an age of fundamental loneliness and constant splintering and splitting of definitions of oneself. Thus, the borderline life analyst or ordinary psychosis analyst engaging in similar techniques to assist in the finding of identity elucidates the crucial importance of contextualization, or as the life coaches say, finding one's best true self, and completing one's life story. Such techniques, I suggest, should be fashioned for the utilization and the need to contextualize the identity and life story for subjects who have a hard time contextualizing at all, in stark contrast to the Oedipal myths and narratives of neurotics, all too frequently repeated by Freudian hysterics, who I might add are disappearing really fast. Where's the last time you saw them? Life coaching is not a mere joke, because it allows one to find a solution to identity if done in a non-coachy way. That which makes an identificatory solution and allows one's own special way into the social bond, and may even, as demonstrated, prevent psychosis as such. It serves as a metaphor for the future of a contextual clinic, or, to use psychoanalyst and psychologist Alan Rowan's term, a non-interpretive clinic. In order to do this, one must be very flexible and fluent in both neurosis and psychosis. One way I suggest is to allow the patient to find their own psychotic solution, their suture of their story, by finding this through coaching that never gives the actual solution or tells them an identification, but leaves the sentences and the narrative to be finished by the analysand's subjective story as it arises. Concluding, the flexibility of the borderline analyst coach of the future reflects what Jacques-Alain Miller suggests, that the analyst of the future must engage in the capacity of a multifunctional object, whom I suggest will work more and more at the crux of psychosis and neurosis in a time where repression is on its way out. We must further investigate what it means to establish identity today, which has become the raison d'etre of being in and of our time. Siva.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
We will come to discussion after the speeches.
Great, sounds good to me.
To find a new, very coachy way, I like this impression very much. And also, life coaching could be for so many of us the faster and easier way to do what you are actually want to do. And like Professor Santorius told us today during his plenary speech, the first rule of changing the world is to keep it simple and find simple and fast ways to change the situation. I would like to introduce one of our special guests is Professor Alfred Fritz. He's the chair of the World Council for Psychotherapy, and he's also rector of the Sigmund Freud University. Professor Fritz is going to give his feedback or being a part of the discussion, just if he wants to be a part of the discussion. Now, from our colleague from America, and like our Asian colleagues in my generation would say, it was a honey for my psychoanalytical heart, your presentation, Peter. And now, from America, I would like to fly back to our neighbor's country and invite our colleague, Natalia Tereshchenko. Natalia, I would like to invite you to present yourself to the stage.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalia Tereshchenko, working in the European Association for Psychotherapy, studying at Sigmund Freud University in Vienna. And originally I'm from Ukraine, and my report will be also about psychotherapy in Ukraine. Well, today we have very interesting discussion. Why we don't want to be psychotherapists. And actually, it seems like we are now at some psychotherapeutic session and we want to discover all the hidden sides, I don't know, maybe resistance or inhibitions, some thanatos drives, or maybe some eros drives that will save us from choosing this profession. But anyway, to investigate the present problems, more precise for me, like for psychoanalytical student, are very important the roots that led us to the current state of psychotherapy field in Ukraine. And I find it, it's a very long-term discussion, but I find it very necessary to mention two facts on which basis we will understand the background of psychotherapy science in Ukraine. So, the first fact is about one story. The story about the two-sided portrait of Ivan Pavlov and the other side of Sigmund Freud. It was in the ordination of Dr. Kohan in Odessa in Ukraine. So during the day when he had his practice, this portrait was turned with the side of Ivan Pavlov. And afterwards, in the evening, when illegal patients, psychoanalytical patients, came to the ordination, this portrait was turned over. The second fact, reading Freud and other psychoanalysis authors was impossible. Actually, it was allowed only in the hidden halls of some state libraries and only for the students that are somehow connected to psychotherapy or psychiatry. And it was also not allowed to take some writing instruments to these halls because it was not allowed to recopy some literature for their own, experience. And now we see that psychotherapy was repressed. And actually, it was replaced by bioscience. The government bodies were hostile to all foreign theories. They were titled as propaganda. Now we see that propaganda was from the other side. The ideology at that time accepted only psychotherapy on its medical fundamentals, and it was necessary to make it simple, understandable, materialistic, and easy replicable. And actually, if we observe the development of psychotherapy in Ukraine at the state level right now, it has not undergone the global changes since that time. And it refers us to the main problems, which are, first, confusion regarding psychotherapy understanding in the government. Second, the problems concerning the disciplinary identity of psychotherapy in Ukraine. Third, the lack of laws in the regulation of psychotherapy science. And as a result, we have two contradictory ways, governmental and non-governmental, of education and practice of psychotherapy. According to the state way, doctors that are admitted to the medical practice choose the specialization psychotherapy, which lasts 4 months. Afterwards, they receive a certificate and they can practice psychotherapy. And there is also the non-state way of psychotherapy. There was established a first international educational project called School for Psychotherapy in Truskavets in Lviv region. And thank you very much, Alfred Fritz, for that. The education from the foreign countries, from professionals from the foreign countries as Austria, Germany, Switzerland came to Ukraine to educate our people psychotherapy, and the education of course lasted not 4 months, but it was 5 years with supervision, with practice, with theory, this education was based on the European standards. And similar projects exist right now also in Ukraine in different cities where the people related professions can obtain the education. And it's under the direction of Ukrainian Umbrella Association for Psychotherapy right now. Regrettably, these changes were not enough to change the state of psychotherapy in Ukraine, as a negative tendency of its development is the formation of many types of psychotherapy, 600 types. Of course, they cannot be called modalities, and of course, they are practiced by charlatans or amateurs, which makes a big danger for people. But, however, without demand, no offer would be possible, because many people in Ukraine have an orientation on religious, mystical, occult, and para-scientific systems, which of course are related to Ukrainian mentality. The tendency toward deep spiritualism is stronger in the Eastern Orthodox area than in the Western Catholic area. That's why we can observe right now just a starting development of the culture to avail the psychotherapeutic help. To contact the psychotherapist is often considered as a weakness or even associated with mental inferiority. And of course, it leads to the stigmatization of personalities with mental disorders and emotional tensions. People often have to hide their problems, so they are not considered mentally ill by the others. Well, summing up all the current problems in psychotherapy field in Ukraine, I question myself. Maybe we should be psychotherapists. Maybe all these problems are why we want to be psychotherapists. And maybe all these problems are sources for our being as psychotherapists. Thank you very much for the day.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you very much. So, as we know, somebody who doesn't know his own history doesn't really have a future. Thank you very much for your very deep analysis, and I would like to represent one more special guest at our discussion. It's Emilia Franch from Brazil. Emilia is the president of Latin American Association for Psychotherapy. Our next guest I would like to invite to the stage is Sandra Wiese from Germany. Sandra, I invite you to introduce yourself. Stage is yours.
Hello, I would like to briefly introduce myself first. Yeah, my name is Sandra Wiese. I'm from Germany. I'm a psychologist. I have a master's degree in psychology, and right now I'm working in a social pediatric center in the western part of Germany, close to the border of Luxembourg. I've been working there since August 2017, so a little over a year now. And during my studies at university, I was thinking a lot about whether I should become a psychotherapist or not. And to be honest, until today, I have not decided on that yet. I wanted to be somewhat sure that's what I want to do before I start this long journey. So I decided to start working first. But I haven't put the idea down yet. So what is it that makes it hard to become a psychotherapist in Germany? Why do people decide not to? First, let me tell you a little bit about our system in Germany. How can you even become a psychotherapist? There are 3 different types of psychotherapists in Germany. There are those called psychological psychotherapists. Those are ones that study psychology. Then there are medical psychotherapists. They studied medicine, and this is only for doctors. And then there's not a real nice translation. They're called Heilpraktiker. A translation would be healing practitioner. This is recognized as an alternative and complementary healthcare profession by German law, but they do not need to have any formal education or training, but they must do an exam at the health authorities. So I want to share about how you become a psychological psychotherapist, because that's usually the psychotherapist someone is referring to when they talk about a therapist. As I already shortly mentioned, first you have to study psychology, which in Germany is hard to do because you have to have good grades in order to get in, and then it takes you at least 5 years. A lot of students take even longer. So once you're done with that, you already have in Germany considered high education. You have to do further education in psychotherapy, and in order to obtain a medical license. This is demanded by the psychotherapy law in Germany, and there are very strict guidelines in this field. So there are 3 different methods of psychotherapy that are covered by health insurance in Germany. That is behavioral psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and dynamic psychology. Others, like systemic or family therapy, for example, are not covered by health insurance. So if a patient decides to go and see one specialist in that field, they need to pay themselves. Otherwise, the health insurance is covering that. So what makes it hard to achieve an official medical license, one of the 3 main methods that are covered by health insurance? First of all, it is very expensive. So you have to pay for the further study. Unlike for university, where in Germany you don't have to pay for this further training you have to. And it's quite expensive. It varies a lot between institutions and all the things you have to do in order to obtain the degree. So, and in the first years especially, you don't earn a lot of money doing that. Often when you're working in a psychiatry, which is necessary in order to obtain the license, you barely get paid. Sometimes you just get paid like an intern, if at all. So that means you have to look for a half-time job at the site. And the other part is, as I've heard today, I think it's the same in a lot of countries, you have to have self-experience too, and that's something you have to pay for yourself as well. So the other point is it takes a long time to complete this training. It depends on the method you're choosing, but it's at least 3 years. Usually it's 5 years or even more. So that means it's like 5 years or more living under these circumstances with financial stress and time stress. So you have to deal with that for a while. And the other thing is you cannot really plan how long it will take, because you will have your own clients and patients, and you need to see a specific amount of people. But as you know, in psychotherapy, there are always patients who are unreliable, or who don't come to their appointments, or they terminate the therapy prematurely, and that means you have to start over and find a new patient. Another point is, as I've already mentioned, the training in itself is very time consuming, because you're working to receive the training, and you're going to lectures and seminars. Most of them are on the weekend, and you have to prepare cases that you need to present or hand in. And so that means that a lot of psychotherapists in training, we call them PIA, because that's a German abbreviation, they don't have much time for their social life left, because they're so busy with all the other things. So, and once you're done with all that, it's not even guaranteed that you get Kassensitz, which means like a seat from the health insurance, that the health insurance is gonna cooperate with you, because these seats are limited. And furthermore, usually as a psychotherapist, and if you open your own practice, you're working as a self-employer, and that in itself brings along quite a few disadvantages. yeah, of course, advantages as well, but yeah. Yeah. And since I wanted to not only bring my own voice, but also some voices from my colleagues. So I asked them, why did you decide not to become a therapist? And some are even in the training right now. So one of them said she's doing the training right now, that she kind of felt forced to do it in her last job, because many employers, they will only hire you if you have a medical license in psychotherapy, or if you're planning to do so. So it's much harder for a psychologist to find a job, at least in the clinical sphere, I would say. And another wise was, as I've mentioned before, that it takes several years to complete the training and is very expensive. And a male colleague said that even after this very long journey, and it's considered a very high education that you have, it is not guaranteed that you will obtain a salary in your own practice that you need to provide for your family. Because it's self-employment, it's always kind of unstable. Yeah. And one more personal statement was, this was a little less about the system, but like more personal things. This colleague says that she prefers working with really structured approaches, like doing intelligence tests, like we do in the Social Pediatric Center, because she considers herself a little chaotic. And in psychotherapy, yeah, at least unless you're doing behavioral therapy, there's not a lot of things structured for you. You're the one that has to structure it. So to conclude, there are many difficulties in the educational program of becoming a psychotherapist in Germany, and they are working on the conditions and trying to make them better, but right now it is uncertain when this is going to change. And I'm not sure yet if this is going to be my way, but I'm open, and who knows what the next years are going to bring. But I think that psychotherapy is a really beautiful profession, and I think it's like one of those professions where you get really close to people and hear life stories and actually have an impact on someone's life, which is, yeah, something very honorable, and I think it's a great privilege to have. Yeah, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Sandra and I are having a personal story, because 1 year ago, Sandra wrote me an email. She got in touch with my book about polymodal psychotherapy, and then she asked me if it's possible to come to my practice and make practica. And because I'm working in Russian and German and English, I said, okay, I never thought about this, but why not? And Sandra is such an amazing, talented psychotherapist, so it would be a great pity if you wouldn't develop yourself in this direction. But this is also some kind of very important question, and I would like to use your methods of analysis and of understanding in the world and giving all these processes a meaning, and ask myself, but what's the reason? Why does the system makes this so hard? Why does people like very world famous and successful people in the field of psychotherapy, like Professor Makarov, are telling, if I would know how it's going to be, how long and how less education I will get through this official education, I wouldn't go this way. So it means if the beginners would pay a little bit more attention to the papers and regulation, and they will realize how long this way is, and there is nothing that the system is promising us on the end of this way, our profession is just losing such a treasure and talented psychotherapist. But what's the new way? Is it to go kind of an easier way and go to coaching, counseling, mediation? Or our generation is the future, and now it's not, we are in the kind of the age, we are not speaking about the growing ups or somebody ruling our world. We are already doing this. So this is also a big question I would like to ask all of you and also myself. How do we have to change and how this field of psychotherapeutic education, and how we can understand this fear of the system for our profession. So I would like to ask, because we do have a discussion, I would like to ask who wants to come to the stage and say something to this topic. So now we have a open microphone. Yes, and they are coming to discussion. If you don't want to come to the stage, we will use the rules of our profession and things we are used to and make a circle and make this kind of discussion. So, would you like to do that? Oh, yeah. Peter is in. Yeah? Okay, let's do this.
Мы сделаем круг и будем уже дискутировать в круге из... Wir machen einen Sesselkreis und machen dann weiter diese Diskussion, weil es war dann der Vorgang.
Wasn't mine.
Я делаю круг, посмотри, как можно быть со стороны. You want to sit in the circle or outside the circle? Ich mach mir so, а можешь выключить эту штуку? А то будет светить.
Сейчас попробуем.
Vielleicht muss ich ganz sitzen.
So we have 40 minutes more, and everything you're going to say is not going to stay in this room. So we have an online translation and also a recording. So you're welcome to share your thoughts and feelings.
Maybe we should start with that, for example, when we are thinking about the development of our profession in Russia, we should first think about the mentality that we have here. For example, when you deal with, I'm not telling about the 70 years of the Soviet period, that when there was an ideology, and when there is an ideology, that there can be psychology, because psychology is about the private, it's about the person. Ideology is about the control of the government over the people. And this is the first reason that we have a problem with these psychological professions. The second reason, I think, is that we still have a mentality that when you go to a psychologist, you have some problems. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What problems do you have? Oh, really? Maybe you have some family problems. So there is a stereotypes in our society that sometimes can feel us shame that we go to a psychologist. For example, when I finished my career as a lawyer and I became a psychologist, starting from my parents, ending with my friends from university, say we have some real problems. Maybe we can help you. Maybe we can do something. And I think that's the first and the main problem is that we still have a mentality that psychology is about the illness. It's not about the happiness, not about the healthy life, not about the development, not about the self-radiation, self-development, but about the illness. That's why I think it's just developing not so much. Thank you. What do you think about this, guys?
I think it's a couple of
Guys,
components.
I would like to ask you to introduce yourself because
Sure. Lena Fagan, Relationships Research Institute. I've sort of lived between the countries, but I think it's a lot about different aspects. One is educational process. Is there a clear path on how you become a specialist, get licensed, get certified, what modalities are offered, who is offering them, and what body governs those entities. And that's one. Another one is the cost of education. In the US, everything is straightforward. If you decide to become a doctor, for example, and mental health is always overlooked, even in the US. But if you decide to become a doctor, you know it's at least 10 years of schooling you have to do, plus the 3 years of internship, residency, where you do 36-hour shifts, and you have to stay in that hospital, live and breathe it. And that's your life for the next 10 years, where you virtually make no money and live on potentially stipend or something like that. But that also is changing today, and NYU this year, like a couple of months ago, announced that their medical school is going to be free for students, and that's a big step towards providing that education and getting really devoted people, because if you want to become a doctor in the US, unless you're completely ready to dedicate yourself to the profession, you don't go in that profession, because the pathway to becoming a doctor is so complex that you really have to be a fan of what you do. And I think that's important, that an easier route may not be the best option, because it may not attract the best people, in the sense that people that are truly passionate about the profession. And I think that the longer but standardized path might be a better way to go about it, where you know what to do to become a professional, but it's not an easy way to become one, so that it requires effort and integrity.
I'm gonna have to just take the opposite on that, obviously, but I reread before this conference, and it was mentioned today, Freud's paper on lay analysis, because I think it's, very important that though it would seem logical that we need to go through all the hoops, and it is something we need to take seriously, it does keep a lot of people out, and I think Freud was right that a lot of the more creative people, if you will, may be some of the best therapists who just can't. I know I couldn't be a doctor, for example, and I think I've been a damn good therapist. And to use, just because I'm from there, and you brought up the States, I bring up the coaching thing kind of just tongue in cheek and ironically, but it's interesting. There's some analogies that are interesting. For example, I'd like to hear actually about other countries, because my understanding in the United States is that therapy is becoming less popular, and one thing I know for sure is that it's becoming less popular among men, and that life coaching has, and a lot of therapists have actually thrown away, they don't use their licenses anymore and have gone to coaching precisely because men don't come to therapy anymore. I imagine it must be similar in Russia, but the difficulty to get men to come to therapy. But what's interesting is that while therapy is getting less popular, the bureaucracy and medicalization of therapy keeps going more and more. So it's like, at some point, people are going to be sick of that, or there's not going to be that many therapists. At the same time when we need more and more. So, I don't think there's any easy answers, and I think it's been at the root of therapy, why I bring up the lay analysis paper since the beginning, is this it's a problem. And I think we're going to face a new version of it now. So just to give the opposite end of the spectrum. Thank you.
I just also had an idea that I wrote in your Instagram yesterday, Katya. So you told that there was a discussion on compression, and that about half of psychologists come to profession because of their own traumas.
Yeah.
To overcome their own traumas. I just was missing you, and you told that the profession of psychologist is less popular among the men. You told, yeah?
Definitely the profession,
Yeah.
but even among the patients, yeah.
Yeah, I see.
The profession has almost no men.
Yeah, I see. I just thought you give me a chance to think that maybe I don't want to be a therapist, maybe because you get over your trauma. For example, today I asked my friends in Instagram, guys, what do you think? If do you want to be a psychologist? If not, say why. And I got some answers, and one popular answer was because now I don't want to be a psychologist, I don't want to be a psychotherapist, because earlier I wanted to save everybody. When you're a saver, yeah, when you, for example, in childhood, some people, when they understand that their own wishes, their own emotions are not so important, and they are not listened, they are not something important. They grow up and they understand that they should always deal with some others' emotions, some others' problems. So they are the classical savers. Maybe when the psychotherapy and the is among us, and we grow up over our traumas, maybe the need to save others is not so important for us. I just think that maybe we growing, we coming over our traumas and the problems in childhood, and that's why the professional therapist is not so necessary for our own.
Mm-hmm. So I think it depends. So I don't want you to stay anonymous. So it's Irina Campbell.
I'm sorry. My name is Irina Campbell. I'm a dance therapist now.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it's a question of motivation for the to start the therapeutic education. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is starting a therapeutic education because he wants to solve his own problems, mm-hmm. and also having some kind of narcissistic thoughts, mm-hmm. like my problems and my mind is so complicated, a therapist mm-hmm. couldn't solve it, I have to study all this psychology through mm-hmm. to find the answers for myself. Mm-hmm. Or maybe somebody is like having, like you was saying before, this meaning of mind, like, oh, if I'm going to the therapist, then it means I'm crazy. Mm-hmm. So, and it's better for me, I will study psychology and psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And according to me, and as far as I know, I'm as a chair of the training therapy committee by Professional Psychotherapeutic League of Russia. I see 5 types of people coming into psychotherapy. And this is a type, I'm calling this the Strannik. So I forgot the name now.
Strange traveler.
Yeah, no, those like a traveler. Huh? Yeah, I will remember the name. So this is somebody who is, their main motivation into the profession is to be free, to free themselves from all these problems and they got. And so, and also for training therapists and for educational institute, it's so important to realize that there's really a lot of people coming into the education, but they never have a goal of staying in the profession, because the education and also training therapy and this psychological knowledge are the main goal for them. And afterwards they decided for another education, for family, and to go the different way. But it doesn't mean that the psychotherapist, training therapist, supervisor, or institution wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. He just came for his own experience and to free himself, and not for becoming a psychotherapist. And I mean, we have a very heavy profession, it's true. I mean, we are having a lot of responsibilities. Mm-hmm. We have to be a lot of things. Like there are so many different psychotherapeutic cultures in different countries, and also in different institutions in one country. Mm-hmm. Even how do you dress? Is it okay to be sexy as a psychotherapist, or do you have to look like a grandmother starting with 20? But it's true. Like, I know that to be attractive or sexuality in the therapy is a very big fear of the beginners psychotherapists, because they are not sure they can deal with this sexual transference. Yeah, but still, I mean, with today's discussion, I wanted to create something new in the frame of the huge Congress, because having just 15 minutes for a speech, having no conversation, and just, it's like a kind of bulimic process. You're just eating all this knowledge, and after this you throw this away and got just the feeling I'm empty. And now I felt even more colder because it was so cold. And we're very isolated as a professionals. because we cannot speak with our, okay, all my family members and best friends are psychotherapists, so I'm special in this field. So, but nobody wants, our normal friends don't want to know this, because most of them wants to believe that you're super intelligent, you're special, you love all these crazy people. We do, yeah, but still sometimes we just has our own frustration and we would like to share it. And it makes people really afraid. It afrays them because we are starting to be normal, and they don't want to see a normal therapist. They want us to, you know, to die after he left our praxis and then raise up when they're calling. So there are so many things about our profession, and now I'm thinking about, yeah, it's very hard to become a licensed psychotherapist. And if you got it in one country and you will move to another country, you can start, it's over and over. But then I'm thinking about my parents. They took the risk to make this underground psychotherapeutic education, knowing that they can go to the prison if somebody will find out that they are visiting the psychoanalytic underground group in the Fight Club. And so I couldn't, so the times are different, and now I feel you already coming up, and I'm happy about it. The times are different, and to say that so we have it very bad, we have it better than the generation before us. The question is, what are we going to do with this new world of psychotherapy? Say something.
Well, it is a very interesting discussion. As I understood, I hope you correctly, that what is the difference between a psychotic person and a normal person, and what type of psychotherapist, what type of personality do you need to become a psychotherapist? And a lot of negative aspects have been said, and not so many positive aspects. I want to raise a few positive aspects to the negative ones, which have their place.
Yeah, sure.
And can understand, and it's good that it is discussed. But the positive things are that to become a psychotherapist is a fascinating experience, which with clients, which you never get bored. It's always, I practice now more than 40 years, and always still interesting. But the other side is that I often have the feeling I'm still a beginner, because the world of psyche is a very, very wide one, and so many aspects can be discussed that it never ends. But this, from my point of view, is interesting and not negative. I have written about psychotherapy as a science of subjectivity that stresses that the person is in the center, the inner person is in the center of our work. We call it work. But often it's entertaining. It's not heavy, it's often enlightening, and sometimes I think I'm happy that I don't have this problem. So it's also a comparison between the patient and oneself. And the reality is, because you said there maybe not so many psychotherapists, the reality is, when I look back these 40 years, that psychotherapy grew tremendously worldwide. And with this growing, and you find psychotherapy now everywhere in the world, even if in Afghanistan. with this growing, at the same time, structures started to develop. The World Council is one structure, but there are many structures, especially also in the national countries, which gives those who are interested in this kind of interesting work, gives them a possibility to connect. One dilemma is said several times, that is that in many countries, Russia is one of them, there are many insecurities because the term of psychotherapist is not legally protected. And therefore, the same in Iran, the same in Brazil, in Latin America is not protected. In Europe we have, I said this morning, we have now I think 13 or 14 laws which define all psychotherapy. They are different, they all define psychotherapy, and those who are moving in that have so to say, a legal frame where they can be sure that when they do the things correctly, they can work in this area. And I just think of a few countries, Italy, Germany, Sweden, everywhere is psychotherapy blossoming because of this structure.
Psychotherapy is
blossoming, it's growing. And in more and more countries there's also a paying for a public paying for, in Germany was the first, no was the second, no was the first, and then Sweden followed, but now Austria, Finland, Netherlands, they pay public money for psychotherapy. And more and more money comes into the pot. And we had long discussions in Austria because the psychiatrists were very against and the psychologists were very against an own profession because they had the idea that the mental illness is a cake, and they get a piece of the cake, and when there's a third one, the piece of the cake becomes smaller. And I always said, no, this is not a fixed cake. It is something which can grow or shrink.
yes.
And what I said today, with this 38% of mentally handicapped people in Europe, we know the cake is tremendously big. It's tremendously big. No one could even, no group can even serve for it at all. So, from my point of view, it is not a cake, it is something growing or shrinking, and it is the question of psychotherapists whether they have the right answer to these needs. First, you said about oneself. Do I find the right answer for myself, for my anxieties, for my depressions, for my constructing my own life cycle? This is the first question. But the second one is, can we develop an offer where people say, yes, this is interesting for me. And in that we can learn a lot, because this cake, this undefined cake, there are many professions around it. Psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, but then healers. In Russia, the Alternative Medicine Association has 200,000 members. In Tuva, for instance, a province in Siberia, shamans are legally recognized. Then we have lawyers. Lawyers do a lot in our field now. In our field, they perceive it also as their field. For instance, in mediation, in conflict resolution of couples, but in other areas too. So they are also competitors. Then social workers are competitors, and counselors of all type are competitors. The priests are competitors. They are losing, you know.
Yes.
They are losing in Europe, not everywhere, but in Europe, where there is Islam, they are growing.
Yes.
But in Europe, they are losing. And I remember am I talking too long?
Do you have a feeling you're talking too long?
Yes, because so much comes into my mind.
No, I think everybody here was waiting for you to speak to us, and everybody here is just happy that you woke up.
An anecdote came into my mind. In the year 2002, I had a meeting in the context of the Second World Congress for Psychotherapy, which was in Vienna. I had a meeting with the Archbishop of Vienna. He was. I invited him to discuss the question of what belief means with Otto Kernberg, which is a prominent psychoanalyst. It was very interesting. And I remember very well, we were a few people, and he said, "Can you explain why priests go down and psychotherapists grow?"
But we stole the cake from them.
So to say, we have a better offer, I would say, not stealing, the better offer. And one of our colleagues said, "Yes, because it is more sexy." And religion is not sexy anymore. So that was one of the, he was a little shocked. And I think it's not right, because from my point of view, the truth is that we have better existential answers for individuals. We don't say it's a sin. I give you an example, a very personal example.
It's on record.
Oh, then thank you. Thank you. That's too personal for being recorded. I'm not thinking of something else. But I mean, I was saying it theoretically, but this means very practical to focus on that what the person needs, and to understand, and not giving a formal answer, but trying to go with the person into the different aspects of the problem.
Thank you. Every time I'm being a part of discussion, especially on this kind of very interdisciplinary congresses, when psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists are speaking about, having the feeling that we have the one cake to share, then I realize the higher level of education of all these representatives of the profession, the more they realize that we are not sharing the different cakes. We have a cake, we have our different cakes. Because something what we are really about to love in our profession. A psychiatrist would never want to do this. He has no education, there's no time, and also no patience. Or also something I wouldn't do with my clients or patients. You're speaking with them how they can get their taxes back or making their handicapped license. This is something a social worker is doing. And I think this is also something the good professional education in our field has to pay more attention on. That we have nothing to share, and we also cannot share the people. And if all the people will go to therapists and psychiatrists, we couldn't handle it, because there are too many and too less mental health or people from the helping professions.
Yes, and I didn't say that. I just started to say it in the beginning. What type of person should you be to become a psychotherapist? And one is that empathy. Empathy is very important for our human existence. When you have a lot of empathy, that is good. When you are interested in getting to know, when you are curious. I give you an example. In my house, I was studying a young medical student, and he saw me and said, I'm going to do my practice now in psychiatry. I'm very eager to and happy to make this experience. And after a few months, I met him, and I said, well, how was it? And he said, it was awful. I could not stand the stories of the patient. And I said, that's the difference. We are interested in these stories.
And sorry. I just want to say thank you also for pointing out what's so singularly special, I think, about psychotherapy is that we learn from our patients. And I think that's a lot different than the model, even of psychiatry, the sort of doctor-patient model.
Right.
You know, is learning as in your own. That's the difference, by the way, from the self-fix and doing your training analysis or your training in psychotherapy, where you learn from your analyst and then you learn from your patients. And that's so, I think, specific.
But that also goes back to standardization of the profession. Because when you go to a doctor, you know they all went through the same training, and hopefully they will provide the same quality of service. Choosing a psychotherapist or someone of that sort is a very intimate process where you have to feel extremely comfortable with the person that you're sharing your experience with as a patient. And just something that Professor Fritz said when you were saying that there are a lot of regulations now, a lot of laws regulating profession in Europe, and you said that because the public money now pays for visits. And the minute and we certainly see that in the US, right? When the minute insurance companies and public sector starts paying for something, the regulations come in because they have to protect the patient from pretty much everything. You know, starting with privacy and all the other laws that come into play now in healthcare. And that's a very important step, like who is paying for the treatments.
Yes, I mean, the discussion in the US, I followed it in the 70s, from the 70s on, was, and in other countries it is the same, that but in America they have been successful that the psychiatrists and psychologists prevented a third profession. They integrated it into their profession and social workers, and therefore psychotherapy as such, as a professional term, vanished in the States. And therefore we were very eager to protect the title. So that is clear. For instance, when we think of research, for public research grants, it's a huge amount of money is here for research everywhere in the West. Milliards of money. And the question is, who gets the money? And psychotherapists are mostly not listed. There are professions which are listed, and psychotherapists not. And when you mix it up and you say psychologists, then this is a totally different thing. And therefore is the labeling so important. And in the States, it is a psychologist who does psychotherapy or does not, or just say.
Yeah, psychotherapy means nothing.
Means nothing.
It's something you do, an activity, but it's not a person. It's not a.
Yes.
profession.
I mean, in Brazil, it
Yes,
is
in
a
Brazil.
different situation.
No, 400,000
Psychologists.
psychologists in the College of Psychologists.
Right.
And 4,000 in a year come more.
Right.
Okay. And and the people and the students become psychologists and want to do psychotherapy. It's awful. It's a danger. It's a danger.
But
But in 2003, I knew Alfred Fritz.
no,
I know another but.
I think of another part, but I will say it afterwards.
No. And then he asked it. In Brazil is association, a Brazilian Association of Psychotherapy. No. Well, and then in 2004 we did Brazilian Association of Psychotherapy. But it's no simple. It's not simple. It's very difficult because psychotherapist, psychologist, who is the psychotherapist? And then we are trying to do a definition in Brazil because many people wants to attend the people. We have shaman, we have many kind of people, the
Readers?
Yes, acupunturista, many kind of people want to help people. Well, the psychologist that goes out goes out to the university, open a room to attend the people and do things that very upset.
Yes, harms the patient.
Yes, because bad psychotherapy do problem to the people. In Brazil, we are saying this. Psychotherapists with people don't know what is psychotherapy. It's not psychotherapy, but it's very dangerous. And then we are trying to do conversation because psychotherapists, we recognize, the Brazilian Association recognize when the people do a course with many hours, has a, what's the name? Homes to do a psychotherapy. And then we are trying to conversation with the institutes that learn the people to do psychotherapy. Did you understand?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I think we have a very similar problem here in Russia with the psychotherapist, with the definition. We have, if you look through the law, through the Russian law, we see that the only definition of psychotherapist is in a medical law. So it's the doctor who finished the basic medical education and who had 2 years of specialization. And in law, yes, it is definition of psychotherapist.
Well, we put on the psychiatric specialization
Yeah,
first and afterwards
psychiatry,
the
yes, and then
psychotherapy.
yes, so it's the third grade. What is, if we look through the area of non-medical psychotherapists, we don't have any laws that say what is it, who is it, what's his education. We also don't have a law regulating who is psychologist. That's why here in Russia we have the coaches who finish the 2-week education.
Yes.
We have a psychologist who did that.
2 weekends.
Sometimes 2 weekends
Yes,
even,
yes.
yeah. Sometimes 1 weekend.
Yes.
It depends on. Yeah.
Yes, there is
The same problem is-
what you said about standardization in medicine. This is also necessary for a profession.
Yes.
I give you an example. I remember when I started, it was not a big scene when the psychotherapist had a sexual affair with a patient. Nowadays he can lose his license.
Go to jail.
There is not only the Me Too, but this is a long discussion in society and in the profession to understand that this person who comes is not someone who looks for an affair and then is healed when sexually happy, then it is neurosis is over. So this is a naive idea. The complex idea is that the person comes because of special traumatic situations,
Suffering. He's
which are behind, for instance, sexual transference, and this has changed. So psychotherapists have now, in regulated countries, have norms which they have to respect. Otherwise, they get a problem with the authorities, and the authorities are not law persons or so, but psychotherapists who watch that the ethical code of psychotherapists is respected. So this is the way.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues and friends. We are having 3 more minutes, and I would like to use this time to ask every of you to say one or few words, like about today's discussion, or maybe about what is crossing your mind and what do you feel. Can we start with you, Professor Khodaryarfat?
Thank you very much. I wanted to first of all tell about the psychotherapy in Iran, and it is a big challenge between psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists in Iran. However, from about 2 or 3, about few years ago, only clinical psychologists can say that I'm a psychotherapist, and only PhD student counselor who under 500 supervision can tell that I'm a psychotherapist. The label in Iran, we have not the label of psychotherapist. However, all of them in clinical psychologists say that yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. But the certificate, for example, then I say about University of Tehran that in Faculty of Psychology what I do for psychotherapy. In the certificate, all clinical psychologists can do therapy, can do psychotherapy, however, without permission of the association, Iranian Association of Psychology and Counselor cannot permitted, they have not permitted to do. However, in many private, for example, if I have a clinic, I can gather many students, and what I do not discount, but it's only example. And under supervision, the bachelor, the master degree of clinical psychology and counselor and PhD degree under supervision can do psychotherapy. For example, in University of Tehran, Faculty of Psychology, I wrote a letter to the clinic after I found that he or she educated in psychotherapy under supervision of some professor of our faculty. And after, for example, the student in the class, many in our faculty educate the PhD student near psychotherapy, educate psychotherapy. And then after I found that yes, he or she can go to the clinic and can see clients. I have to write a letter to the clinic, and yeah, she or he under my supervision can do psychotherapy. And in my class, in the first session, for example, I'm working with family therapy, cognitive behavior family therapy. In first session of the family, when I go to the clinic with my students who bring a family for psychotherapy, and the other students in the class see under the
In the mirror room.
in the middle, and in the first session I diagnosed that what's the problem, what is the problem, and then after I diagnosed, because I want to teach our students about psychotherapy, and this PhD student can continue psychotherapy, family therapy, and under my supervision.
Yeah.
And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much for this discussion and the topic. Why I don't want
Who
to
are
become
you?
a psychotherapist. Oh, my name is Dr. Sandra Kühldorfer. And I'm very glad that we have the discussion why I don't want to become a psychotherapist, because we have to define us, our profession, and what we have to offer to the world. And hopefully, maybe the next topic will be on why I absolutely have to be a psychotherapist and that's the best job on earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because we have to think of all this, what stops the people to go there.
And how to make our profession even more sexier.
Not only sexier, but no, not only sexier, like a normal job, like a profession as, I don't know, an engineer or a dentist, and it shouldn't be so personal, mystificated, and like what are we offering? No, our offer has to be clear, and what you can give to the world, and yeah.
Okay, can I go through that?
They have to finish now, so I would like really, if you want to say something, to say one word, really, just to finish it, because we are running out of the time already for 4 minutes.
Okay, community over the pedagogy or state as a register of who is a therapist, because individuality is also important.
Thank you, Peter.
My name is Leo. I would like to thank you because it was really interesting to listen to you, and I wanted to say several things, but unfortunately we have lack of time, and just listening to you was really interesting. I want to say that I'm a social psychologist, and I'm only beginning my way as a psychotherapist. The main thing that why I don't want to be a psychotherapist, I think that it's really important. The thing it's because I think that the main thing is the responsibility that you take And I think that problems with law, how much time it will take for you, for example, for me it doesn't bother, because I understand that if I want to be that, I will be. But the responsibility, it's, from my point of view, the responsibility which you take as a psychotherapist is much more, is bigger, is really bigger than, for example, a surgery who have a body on his table. Because here he works with the mechanism, and you work with, I would say, not individuality, but with some sort of universe. And a little mistake can do horrible things. As it was said, a bad psychotherapist is a danger, and I fully agree. And I think that this is the main thing, what I'm afraid of and what's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Leonid Natochev.
I'll just say thank you because I've said enough.
Thank you.
Kristina Belovich, thank you. But one point, I think that educational system needs to be rebuilt. Needs to be rebuilt.
Thank you, Kristina.
Reconstruction.
Ira?
I'm enough. Yes, thank you very much.
One word?
Thank you.
Lena?
My name is Lena. I'm sorry.
You're sorry.
Victoria?
My name is Victoria, yes, and one small utopian story. 1 week ago I was in Psi Festival in Anapa, and it was very interesting time. It was 3 days with same people, and after 3 days one woman told that, wow, it was so happy time for us, and I would like to live in the city just with psychologists. And this is very fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandra?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very interesting, and I might have talked negatively about it, but I was just wanted to find out the difficulties that we just have in Germany. But yeah, I really think it's a really beautiful profession. And it was really interesting to learn about how it looks like in different countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalia?
Yes, thank you very much for the space, for these opportunities to share our thoughts. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to thank you and highlight again how amazing it is that our generation has a possibility to communicate with all the world and with different nationalities, to stay in contact, and I would like to thank you for that and see you tomorrow by our second day of future. Thank you. Thank you.